3 days, she just completely ignored me. I could be sitting in the house right next to her and wouldn't look at me, wouldn't even acknowledge I was in the room.
Welcome in to another episode of Foreigner Loves
Filipina.
So I thought maybe today we'd talk a little bit about conflict resolution with a Filipina, because it's a very complicated subject, guys. You know, there's a 30-year age difference between Melanie and I. She's 28, I'm 58. But in a lot of ways, Melanie's still more mature than me. Melanie is far more mature than a 28-year-old American girl in just so many ways. She's just more emotionally stable. She's just very responsible and, you know, just way more mature than a 28-year-old American girl. And, you know, they say one of the ways you can measure how mature someone is by how selfish they are. You know? And I look at Melanie. Melanie's just an incredibly unselfish person. I mean, she is far more concerned about her family and about me and her friends than she is about herself. So I think Melanie's a very mature person in all but one area, and that is conflict resolution. And I think it's really kind of a Filipino thing, that their ability to handle conflict is not very good. And it's a cultural thing that's just a little hard to understand. It's a combination of pride. They don't ever want to admit they're wrong. Saving face. They want to look good to everybody else. And just wanting to avoid conflict at all points. So they want to avoid conflict to the point where they'll never resolve the conflict. It'll just, even if it's a minor thing, it can just go on and on and on because they don't ever want to resolve it. If you're looking to be in a relationship with a Filipina, it's an area that you definitely need to kind of be aware of, because it is a little trickier than I anticipated. I remember when I first heard about Tampo and what it was, and we've got a lot of other episodes on Tampo if you want a more complete explanation, but it's basically the silent treatment, but it's on steroids. And I remember I thought, fantastic. So if we have an argument, she's just going to go into the room and sulk for a while. We don't have to have any yelling and screaming or a big fight. And it sounds like a great deal to me. But I will say, guys, the way they handle it, it is a little more extreme than I think what we're used to when we hear the silent treatment. I mean, literally, they'll go days, and you could be sitting right next to them, and they won't even acknowledge you're there. And I got to say, it's a pretty childish response, and it's just like dealing with a teenager or a preteen in some ways. So just know, guys, that Melanie and I we've been together 7 years. We've been married almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years in May. Well, she got here in March of 4 years ago. We got married in May. So we're almost approaching 4 years living together. And luckily, because she is mature in every other way, we really have very few arguments. Obviously, you have the little disagreements or things any couple's going to have, but very, very few major arguments or disagreements. I would say we've only had 2 full-blown Tampo episodes where she just really went into Tampo deep. And I think part of that is because I have decided that I just kind of cut it off. I think maybe that's the advantage of being a little older, because I know when I was younger, I'd be stubborn too. Like, I just wouldn't want to ever end the argument if I felt like I was right. I will say now, if we have a little tiff, and if I know I'm even partially at fault, I will immediately go to her, say I'm sorry, and just end it. We had an episode not long ago, just a couple of weekends ago, where I made a joke, and she didn't like the joke and it was kind of ill-timed and she got offended and she stormed off. And my immediate response was, well, fine. If you want to be like that, I mean, you're being ridiculous. But then I was like, okay, all right, I did offend her. I didn't mean to, but yeah, that probably really wasn't the best time for that joke. So I just went, she stormed off to her, our spare bedroom was like her dressing room. And I went over there and gave her a hug, gave her a kiss on the forehead and said, I'm sorry. And guess what, guys? It was over in seconds. But if I hadn't done that, it might have gone on for days. So the two big episodes we had were the two times that I just wouldn't do that. I refused because I just felt that I wasn't at fault at all. It was all on her, and I got a little stubborn and was like, I'm not the one that has to say sorry all the time. Sometimes she's got to say sorry. And what happened in both those instances, guys? For 3 days, she just completely ignored me. I could be sitting in the house right next to her and wouldn't look at me, wouldn't even acknowledge I was in the room. And in both cases, I ended up having to kind of go to her and say, all right, this is ridiculous. In fact, the last time it happened, we got onto that third day, and I had just gone and played poker every day. And I was like, hey, if she's going to ignore me, then I just won't be around the house. I'll just go play poker. But on that third day, I was coming back, and I was like, all right, maybe we need to end this. And I had stopped to eat on the way home at one of her favorite restaurants. And they got a grilled shrimp appetizer that she loves. So I bought that appetizer and I got it to go. And I was going to see if that coffee shop was open. It doesn't look like it. And so when I got home, she was in her spare bedroom. She had spent the last 2 nights sleeping there. She wouldn't sleep in our bed. And guys, if I told you what the argument was, I mean, it's just the dumbest argument. I mean, it just was not a big deal. But so I kind of popped my head into, knocked on the door, popped my head in, and she was standing there. And I was like, are you ready to talk yet? She gives me a little scowl. What do you mean? What do you want me to do? And I said, I had dinner at Perky's and I brought you the barbecue or the grilled shrimp. She gets a big smile on her face. I walk in and I put my arm around her and give her a kiss on the forehead. And, so then we went and sat down and talked about what the issue was, and it was all over in a few minutes. And so guys, I just tell you all this, that if you're going to be with a Filipina, you're going to have to put your pride aside and just kind of, their conflict resolution is terrible. I mean, it's just terrible. And Melanie's not the world. I mean, I know some of Melanie's friends, both here in the States and back in the Philippines. And they're way worse. You're just going to have to, even if you weren't in the wrong, you're going to have to be the one that ends the argument. Doesn't mean you have to admit you were wrong, even if you weren't, if you feel you weren't. Like I said, in the 2 instances where it really was, I feel it was 100% on her, it wasn't on me. But it still took me to kind of have a little peace offering and end it, and then we had a conversation. I will say, guys, in those instances, it probably is best to let them brew for a few days. Let them, because I think they kind of need to get into their feelings a little bit. They need to kind of have a time to settle down and think. And I think once you approach them and say, hey, let's talk, they've had a little time to realize they really overreacted. And by that time, their heart is, kind of softened, and they missed you. I know this last time, Mel's like, I really missed you. I'm like, well, you didn't have to miss me. I mean, you're the one that stormed off. You're the one that chose to sleep in another room for 2 days. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But I don't know if that's, the best way. I've always heard you're not supposed to go to bed mad at each other and all those type of things. But I do think my experience with the Filipina is, in rare instances, you just got to let them brew. And you know what? You give them a couple days and they'll come back and they'll be happy that you kind of made the peace. But don't expect them to come say, hey, it's time to talk. But I will say in the vast majority of times, just don't even let it get to that. Just go and put your arm around her, tell her you're sorry, and then just move on. Life is too short. I remember an old friend of mine back when I first started working, back when I was in my early 20s, a very wise man that I worked with, that I really had a lot of respect for. And I don't even remember what the issue was, but I remember him talking one time. This is when I was early married with my first wife. And he was like, you know, Daryl, you got to decide what's more important to you, to be right or to have peace in your home and have a healthy relationship with your wife. That always stuck with me. And so I've always tried to do that, you know, where possible. Just say you're sorry and make peace. And obviously, sometimes it's not possible, you know, or I wouldn't have been divorced. Sometimes it's just not possible. But whenever possible, I think that's the better way to go. And I will say one other point on having disagreements with a Filipina and dealing with, you know, their conflict resolution. One other thing, guys, I would really advise against is don't yell at a Filipina. And luckily, I'm not a yeller anymore. I will say when I was young, I think it was one of my biggest faults. And I did yell a lot, and I certainly yelled a lot with my ex-wife. And it was one of my biggest regrets, and probably one of the areas that I contributed the most to our problems, is that when I was disrespected by her, which was a lot, my reaction ended up being yelling. And there's another great book about this. You know, I've mentioned the 5 love languages. This book was Love and Respect. I learned a lot about this cycle where when a man feels disrespected, his natural impulse is to yell, which I certainly found to be true of me. And then when a woman feels yelled at, she doesn't feel loved. And so it creates this cycle where when the woman doesn't feel loved, she shows the man disrespect. When the man feels disrespected, he yells. When he yells, the woman doesn't feel loved, and it creates a circle. And I certainly saw that pattern with me and my ex-wife, where that was certainly a pattern that had happened with us. And so anyhow, I really have tried to eliminate yelling for me. And I actually am pretty proud of the fact that I don't even know the last time I yelled. It's been a long, long time. But with a Filipina, if you were to ever yell at her or curse at her, I think you would do so much damage to your relationship, because they have very tender, soft hearts, and they're not used to yelling at all, ever. Like, it's just not in the Filipino culture. I mean, someone could do something absolutely awful to somebody, and they're just not going to be yelling. Particularly in public, particularly in front of other people. Don't ever make a scene in front of other people. But even at home, I think yelling, it's not good in a Western-based marriage, but I think it'd be even more destructive in a foreigner-Filipino relationship, based on my experience.